Chapter 5. Enough already. I often sail away to naps to repair from my perfectionism, procrastination, or the voices of the inner critic shouting, "You'll never make it." Sark. Even in embracing community and finding resources, there are times you feel you don't bring enough to the table. It's when I feel like the story I landed on is someone else's because the demands being put on my resources are way beyond what I have to give. I feel like a fraud because I continue to function as a mom, but it seems like someone else out there could provide all the things I can't. I know I have not only struggled with these feelings, but I still continue to feel inadequate. How do I not give in to the lie? Yes, lie of not being enough, having enough, or doing enough. I was immediately put in the position of feeling inadequate the instant I became a single mom. The load, challenging as it was, seemed so much lighter when there were two of us to shoulder it. I want to do more for my children. I want to have more influence in their lives. I don't feel I'm enough to meet all their needs, but I have come to realize I am enough. I do enough, and we have enough. It's not about having it all and doing it all, but about doing what I can and being grateful for what I can provide. I spent many hours feeling sad for what I couldn't give my kids, yet they were always grateful for what they did get. You are enough. You have enough. You do enough. I want to take them camping, on vacations, and to other countries. I wanted to provide snowboarding opportunities for my sons and horse opportunities for my daughter. I wished they could have more than I could offer. I did attempt to take the boys fishing. I wasn't very good at it or very patient. They really wanted to fish, and I wished there was someone that would take them and really teach them how to angle. Little did I realize they would have an opportunity I would never have dreamed up. It happened like this. When the kids were little, we lived on a farm that had a pond. One day, the 9-year-old neighbor boy came over and saw my sons lying by the side of the pond with sticks and a rope. They were fishing. Needless to say, their technique was lacking. So the neighbor boy, Austin, ran home. He got a fish he had caught the week before. It was frozen, but he took it out of the freezer, brought it back to the pond, and tied it to the rope of my older son without him knowing it. Then he tugged on the line like a fish would, and my son Davis reeled in a very stiff catch. Davis could hardly wait to tell me about the frozen fish he caught in the pond. Through the years, the boys' longings included more than fish. First it was ATVs, then motorcycles, finally cars. Children of wealthier parents had these sort of things, but I couldn't afford even a toy version of their dream rides. I felt badly about not being the kind of parent who could write a check for a car. But my sons, they never complained. They come out of resourceful stock, remember? So they worked and saved until they got what they wanted. It was better that way, but that didn't help my feelings of inadequacy at the time. I still wished I could do more. I would tell my sister, I wish I could be more for them, and she would tell me it was enough for them to have a mom who loved them. I wasn't sure I believed her at the time. I had to change my tune and stop feeling sad for what I couldn't do and be happy for what I could do. Recently, my son needed $600 to pay off his school before they would let him graduate. I couldn't give it to him. But Mr. Resourceful, he saved up and paid it off. He graduated. I'm so proud. But I spent a lot of time playing the should game. I should help him. What kind of mother can't help her son? The crazy thing is, he doesn't feel that way at all. He was proud that he was able to save up and pay it off to graduate. It means more to him that he did. I would have paid it if I could have, but it wasn't a possibility for me, and yet he found a way to make it happen. I'm so proud of Davis. He went to school to do what he loved, and he found grants and scholarships and saved up for the rest. When my daughter was getting married, I couldn't afford a wedding. I suffered so much guilt, but she's resourceful too, so she figured it out and made it all happen and had the best wedding I'd ever been to. She was all right with my limitations. Her aunt and uncle, they paid for her unbelievably beautiful dress. She kept telling me not to worry, but I did. I felt like I failed her. She and her husband found a way to make it happen with the help of church and community. Jenna, you never cease to amaze me. You went on to school and got scholarships and grants and made it happen. My youngest son just graduated. He suffered the loss of a friend recently, and I wanted to be there for him, but he didn't need me. He's handling it. I spent a lot of time feeling guilty when the truth is, Danon is an amazing young man who is ready to take on the world. He's funny and compassionate and independent. I raised these kids to be resourceful, but despite my worry that I wasn't enough, they took what they learned and found ways to do what they needed to do. I wasn't able to provide much in the way of resources, but I did support them and believe in them. I wanted to do so much more, but it turned out to be enough. What are you struggling with? Where do you feel you are lacking? Is it possible you are enough? Even if they aren't getting what you think they need, is loving, supporting, and believing in your kids enough? Asking for help, not connecting it to being enough, is a gift you give yourself, because what makes us enough is the support we have and the friends and love we have in our lives. Giving and receiving, it does take both. The Washington State Readiness to Learn program counts those living in bedrooms with a family as homeless. If that definition is correct, I know homelessness. That shocked me, because when I think of homelessness, I think of people on the streets of Seattle. They live in the doorways, under bridges and freeways and overpasses. We even have a place called the Jungle where the homeless in Seattle live. We don't think of families in transition as homeless, but they are in fact homeless. Having to live with others because you have nowhere else to go makes us homeless. I became homeless when I could no longer pay rent because of my choice to be with my kids and work from home. That's when I lived in a camper for 6 months. During this time of transition, I discovered there were funds available to me. I was able to get gas vouchers, and my kids qualified for free lunch, school supplies, and various other services such as Readiness to Learn, a particularly helpful program that focused on keeping homeless kids from falling through the cracks. These services rely on grants, but it became tougher and tougher to get the grants as the state's economy plummeted. But somehow we made it. We became homeless again a few years later. One summer, my daughter stayed with her dad, and my boys, they stayed with my sister. I stayed nearby in my car. I worked as a gardener, and my goal was to get us all settled in time for school to start. Now, there were friends that offered me places to stay, and I took advantage of that once in a while. Family was great during that time, and I knew I always had a place with my brother and his wife, or my sister and her husband. They would take me in a heartbeat. My kids wanted to stay near their dad, and I wanted to maintain the fleeting opportunity to provide a home for as long as possible. I also wanted to respect their wishes by letting them have both parents close at hand. That homeless season only lasted a few months until I got a job and our farm rental house back. Now the kids were older, and I only worked while they were at school. I learned a lot about homelessness through the Resource Center, and the most remarkable thing I felt was that they treated me, a homeless mother, with dignity. They had helped me during my time of need, and later I was able to help as a volunteer at the center. It was incredible. In fact, it was because of that positive experience that I went back to school and got a degree in social services. A blessing of trials is learning the suffering side of the story and becoming available to others in a completely different way. When women would come into the center to seek help, I was able to tell them that it's going to be okay. You'll get through this. I did. I was enough to make it, and so were they. I've become the queen of resources. You can ask me anything about available resources. Well, go ahead. If I don't know the answer, I'll find it. I discovered people want to help. There are organizations everywhere for almost everything that will help if you have perseverance. There were many I went to with kids in tow and had to tell my story over and over and fill out mounds of paperwork and then wait. There were energy assistance organizations, food banks, food stamps, and housing assistance groups like HUD, which have a 5-year waiting list for people who needed housing. And I made it to the top of the list twice. When I found the local family resource center, it became my lifeblood. Gail was an innovative director who would ask us, the needy, what worked and what didn't. She was interested in us, not just in fulfilling her job description. She thought we each had something to offer. It was also Gail who encouraged me to apply for a job I thought was way out of my league when I didn't have a bachelor's degree. Through perseverance and because Gail believed in me, I got the job second time around. Gail had meetings with our directors of all the charities in the community. That included us, the accessors of charitable services. She wanted us to have a say in how resources were allotted and what services were offered. One accomplishment I remember was the establishment of a traveling application. Now a family would only have to fill out one application, and that would be used by all the charities. This avoided mountains of redundant paperwork, and we didn't have to repeat our sad song over and over again. That helped, but there was still much to be done to restore homeless people to their God-given dignity. At one of these community meetings, Gail surprised me with a special opportunity to be of help. Just as the meeting was about to adjourn, she looked at me and said, "Well, it's almost time to go, but we haven't heard from Laurie yet." So I stood up and I asked how many of them worked as volunteers in an organization offering services. Each one raised her hand. There was such a sense of pride and good cheer. People love to help. I thanked them and asked them where we would be without them. Then I asked them to leave their hand up if they had ever accessed any of these services for themselves. Just one hand remained up. I said, "You all love to help, and it is evident and wonderful, and it may be hard for you to understand us. What looks like ungratefulness is shame. We would much rather be in your shoes. We don't want to be paraded through the office or service center so everyone can see we are the needy." I offered the illustration of our local food bank, which was set up in such a way that food recipients had to pass through the thrift store at the front of the building in full view of all their bargain-hunting friends, who could then watch them enter the food bank, where the recipient was given a cardboard box of donated items to carry back through the thrift store and out. I was grateful for the food, but I was also embarrassed and ashamed that I needed the help. That has now changed, and I like to think my little talk had a small part in the new arrangements. Not only has the food bank moved to a remote property, there are other wonderful changes, like the fact that people actually get to shop, like in a regular market. And with increased options, folks have a choice about what their family will eat. Nevertheless, I left the meeting feeling bad. How could I say such things? I must have sounded so ungrateful despite all the help I needed and received. It took a while to recover. A few years later, another meeting, a lady came up to me and thanked me. She told me she was at that meeting which I spoke, and it had never before occurred to her how it must feel to be in our shoes. I had the opportunity not only to receive resources, but to offer something that would make the system and people's lives better. I talk a lot about giving and sharing resources. I think it's so important to be in a community and to be able to give back when possible. I found one flaw in my theory, and a single mom gave me the words to find my place with giving. I believe in giving even when it seems like I have nothing to give. I believe in sharing or trading with others. I was doing an interview with a friend and fellow single parent, Crystal. She had a bout with cancer, and she was brilliant at recruiting people to help her through this difficult time. It was quite a process even before surgery. I was so proud to be on her list of helpers. It felt good to be walking with her through such a scary time. We were talking about giving and helping out others, and she told me that she can get overwhelmed with giving. She's so grateful for all the help, but if she's not careful, she almost sabotages her family by helping others too much. She said many have a rule of thumb about giving 10% of their financial resources, and she says she has incorporated that into her time giving as well. She says sometimes she feels guilty or obligated to help because she's been helped, but she realizes it's easy to go overboard and try to do too much, and her family suffers. These were wise words from such a young lady. So I thought about that in retrospect, and I know there were times I was so busy trying to help everyone else that I didn't have very good boundaries about when to call it a day. Crystal has found that delicate balance between giving and receiving, and it keeps her family as top priority. Remember I said we lived on a farm? Well, it was a racehorse farm, and the resident racehorses lived there between racing seasons. When I first moved in, I did almost everything for the horses. Besides feeding them, mucking out the barn, I met the veterinarians, the farrier, and the horse haulers. I was paid for my time, but when I took a full-time job, I could no longer keep those random appointments, and so I had to hand off the job. Later, when money was tight, friends would suggest I ask the landlord if there were things I could do in trade, but I only had so much time. I worked full-time. I had 3 kids at home who each had their own activities, and I knew that I had to establish limits to how much I could do. There were also times that people would offer me, say, firewood, or perhaps a small job that I had to turn down because I absolutely couldn't work it into my schedule. I felt badly because I knew some people thought, wow, we hear she needs help. We try to offer her an opportunity to make money, and she turns us down. It was difficult to say no, and I worried people would think I wasn't trying hard enough. I was fighting to keep my family together and had to consider my children's needs, which including having mom present and available at the right time and working to keep food on the table. Both times were important to my mission, and sometimes small jobs subtracted from the mission even while they added to the coffers. Another single mom I know was working 2 jobs already, but was offered another job for $10 an hour. She said no. The person telling her about the job acted as if she was appalled, but my friend said, "It's just not worth it. I'm already exhausted. I have nothing left for my kids or my church. I cannot take on another job." I was really proud of her. By being true to who she was called to be, she was keeping the door open to better possibilities. I know I struggle with this concept all the time. I'm working towards a goal, but it is tough and I'm struggling. But am I going to sell out for a part-time job that's going to subtract and miss the real opportunity when it's presented? Sometimes taking the piecework will lead to less time for the real goal, family, and take away from the little we already have. Logic is death to that part of you that is the miracle maker. Stuart Wilde. I know this is a difficult concept. We want to be logical and we don't want to be hopeless dreamers, but there is a time when all the logic in the world doesn't make it work or make good things happen. Sometimes we have to fall back on our faith and believe and wonder what will happen. We can only do so much, we can only be so much, and our kids need us. Sometimes we have to use our creative juices to make the most out of what we have. Maybe we will lose our home or our rental, but is that the worst thing that could happen? It may feel like it, but maybe not having enough will move us to a place that is ultimately better, or even a different place for us that represents another leg of the adventure. Trying to overextend ourselves to keep what we have may not be the answer. Kids need a parent with a little bit left over for the children. I remember watching a documentary about a housing project. The parents were bussed out to work, so they had about a 2-hour commute each way, and then they worked 8 hours, but really 9 when you included the lunch hour. So 12 hours of their day was taken in working and getting to work. Something happened with the children left at home. They got in trouble and many were put in juvenile halls, and the parent was shamed for not being there for the child. I remember thinking, what other option did she have? It was such a vicious cycle with no way to get out. I haven't been in that type of situation, so I'm not saying that I could have done anything differently. Logically, there was no other option. The parent had to work to live in the project. I had to believe with all my heart that something would work out. Somehow, some way, even though it didn't make any sense, something had to work out. I had to leave the door open for some possibilities by believing I would make it, and that just taking any and every job wasn't the solution, despite the inevitable judgment and misunderstanding that would come. I think one of the more difficult things for me was that people who had never been in my situation regularly told me they didn't understand. They didn't know what it was like to tell your kids you're having ramen for dinner again. They didn't know what it was like to not buy your kids school pictures or Christmas presents. They had no idea what it was like to go to everything alone all the time. They couldn't understand why I couldn't go to a ladies' night out. I couldn't afford babysitting, and I certainly couldn't afford a dinner out. It was hard to say I was too busy when people would ask me out to lunch, and I couldn't afford it. I did sack lunches often with my friend Wendy, or we would split something. When you don't have the time, money, or babysitting, then you don't go, and you don't do anything, but you stay home. And sometimes it's really hard watching other people have a life and do fun things like taking kids to the zoo or the science center. It all costs money. I did, however, come up with a list of free things to do, and we did them a lot. I went to flower nurseries that had trails and would take snacks for the kids and walk on those trails. We swam at the beach, not the pool. We took sack lunches. Thank goodness we didn't have the ice cream truck driving by. That may have been too many no's for me to handle. I hated being misunderstood, but if I actually told them I can't afford it, they would often offer to pay. And this was wonderful of them, but really hard for me. How do you order? What do you order? What's the cheapest thing on the menu? I know it may sound like ingratitude, but if you've been in that position, you know how embarrassing it is. After this, my worst fears were often realized when people just stopped inviting me. There were more facets to being a single parent than most people realize. Nevertheless, I was in life, and my kids and I had each other. Despite all we could do, it was a good life, and I now know that I was enough. There are many famous people who were raised by single moms and many very humble beginnings. When I mention I'm a single parent, people often tell me they were raised by a single mom or dad, and they seem to be grateful for all their parent did for them. They also seem to have a great respect for the parent. There are exceptions, of course. Certainly some were abandoned, neglected, abused, or left alone to fend for themselves. I've heard more stories than I like to admit about kids raised by single parents who were way more interested in dating than nurturing the kids. It's easy for a single parent to end up in a bad relationship. What cost is it to the kids? Are they being abused? Is it really worth dating and remarrying at the kids' expense? I hope I'm not judging. I made mistakes, but when push came to shove, I put my kids first. When I look back on my years, I ultimately chose to be a single parent because I didn't want to get sucked in by another relationship that could be harmful to us. And their childhood went by so fast. My kids are now raised and I have the freedom to do what I want. For a while, I didn't believe I was enough and I was looking for someone to fill that gap. I wanted help, but I didn't want to raise kids alone, so I thought it wasn't good for them. Boy, was I wrong. When I accepted that I was enough and I could outsource what I couldn't give, for example, like big brother, big sister, finding ways to meet the needs I couldn't, rather than trying to fill a void by finding a partner. I found friends that fit the description. My kids call my friend Laurie D. their other mother. She has fixed their cars, had talks with them, but most of all, she was always around and nearby. She was a neighbor, and she would come by for coffee and a visit. She got the gist of how our family worked, and she loved my kids. There were times as a single parent that I wanted someone to share small triumphs with. I knew if I called Laurie, she would be excited for my kids. One difficult time when my boys were having a huge disagreement, she showed up. She got involved in the conversation and helped them resolve their problem. She didn't tell them what to do or how to be. She just asked questions and listened. There were some other times I didn't feel so alone because of friends like Cousin Donna. She lived down the road, and she was actually my kid's cousin and my friend. Besides my kids, Donna was one of the biggest things I got out of my marriage. One night we were scared. We thought someone was on the roof or trying to get into our house. I called Donna, and she got to the house within minutes. The boys met her at the door with their BB guns. She and I walked around the house and discovered the intruder was apples. Our big old apple tree was dropping apples on the roof. So we had a good laugh, and she never condemned me for getting her out of a warm bed. Another time I came home to discover our beloved dog could not move. Something was wrong with him. I called the horse vet to come over because Bear was too big for me to lift into a car. The vet confirmed that he was very sick, and he was about 12 or 13 at the time. The dog's health was failing. I had a decision to make about Bear, and I knew what it was supposed to be. I was very brave until I went in the house to call Donna and asked her to please come over. Her daughter answered the phone, and, well, I couldn't even talk. I was crying so hard. I thought I was doing so well. My neighbor Wilma came over too, and the three of us gathered around Bear in a bear hug and said goodbye to the dear old boy. I can't imagine if I had to do that alone. Bear was a huge part of our lives. I've been so blessed with people and programs coming into our lives to fill some of the gaps. Not everything gets filled in. Sometimes we just have to live with things the way they are, like cars that don't run so great. God bless AAA. We had a washer and dryer that would break down. We had to wait for someone like our friend Mike who knew how to fix things to show up when he had time. And sometimes we had disappointments and disagreements that seemed like they would take us down for the count. But we survived and we became better people in the process. I will never forget telling the school counselor about what our family life was like, trying to paint a picture for her because one of my kids was really struggling. I told about the divorce, the coming out, my remarriage, all the pain, and she looked at me and said, "Those poor babies." I was so touched that she could acknowledge what my child had been through, and at the time I was amazed that she was talking about my kids. We had walked through and talked through everything we had been through, and I thought my kids were well adjusted for all they went through. I believed we were stronger for the struggles, although I would have never chosen them for my family. As I look back, I wonder, was I enough? I was, and thankfully, I wasn't. Together, we were enough together, meaning my kids and myself, our family, our friends, our community. We made it together. I heard Carol Kent, a speaker at a convention. She talked about her book called A New Kind of Normal. She's a well-known Christian speaker who has written many books. Her life fell apart when her son was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. What I loved and hated about her story was that there was no happy ending. She said people would tell her that they were praying for her son to get out of prison, telling her to just believe. But the fact was, any possibility of a pardon had passed, and her son was there to stay. What a brave woman to get up and talk about a story with no happy ending, no resolution, no miracle. He is her only son, and now he's in prison. The point isn't about what he did or didn't do. The point is There are things in life that are unsolvable. There are situations with bad endings. There are women in abusive situations and they can't get out. And when they try to escape, sometimes they get killed. I know a woman who stays in an abusive situation because they are paralyzed, or they don't know without a doubt the price to pay for getting out is too much. It may cost them their children or their lives. There are difficult situations, and people living through them are often very misunderstood. When I worked at a station KSPD in Boise, Idaho, I got to meet and interview Johnny Erickson Tada. She's paralyzed from a swimming accident when she was a teenager. She draws pictures using a pen in her mouth. She makes cards and she sings. She also speaks all over the country. She has made a huge impact improving all the lives of the handicapped. Her attitude toward her disability and life in general was amazing, and I was blown away by her joy and acceptance of what had happened to her. 2 weeks prior to my interview with Joni, I interviewed a couple known for faith healing. They told me Joni is a friend of theirs, and they always tell her if she just had enough faith, she could walk. When I met Joni, I asked her what she does with situations like this. She said, "God bless them. I know my life is making a difference, and if God wanted me walking, I would be." Such grace. Some situations are not solvable. I have friends with a child who has severe autism. My friend is much like a single parent because she's alone a lot. She has 3 other children, but the one with autism can be all-consuming. There is no solving the problem. There's no making it better. She is loving and gracious, and yet she must get to her wits' ends at time. I know people offer her solutions all the time. "Have you tried this?" I don't know her pain, but I've asked her how she copes, and she says sometimes it's just really hard. Her son is never going to grow up and get married and move away, and as he gets bigger, it's harder for her to help him or keep him from hurting himself. I know people who have adopted kids with fetal alcohol syndrome. The parents get advice from friends and family about getting tough with these kids. Really? Their friends don't understand. Some even accuse them of making up excuses, and even some friends who have tried to rescue the poor child from the mean parents. This rescue scenario never lasts very long because typical rescuers have no endurance. The kids look normal, and for the most part, they function very well. But there's something that doesn't connect because they are actually brain damaged. They literally cannot think the way most people do, and they don't understand consequences. What these families have experienced is people swooping in to tell them how to parent and blaming the parents if the child doesn't get certain basic concepts of life. The prognosis for kids with this syndrome is at best inability to hold down a job. At worst, jail, homelessness, addiction, and suicide. There are some stories that don't have a very happy ending, and if you're living it, you need to find support system to help you through, something that helps you get free of the guilt that drains and paralyzes you. If you know someone living with an unsolvable situation, try to validate them before offering unsolicited advice. Think outside of your usual mode of operation. Try to understand and not fix the situation. What that parent needs more than anything is someone who believes their story and believes in them. The last thing they need is to be blamed for things they have no control over. Validating is a free and life-giving gift. "I told you so" is death. I learned a lot about validation after having a miscarriage. The things people would say left me feeling worse about myself and my situation and my God. I don't know why we feel the need to make ourselves feel better at someone else's expense. A miscarriage is unsolvable. It just is. It's very difficult to cross to bear, and with all the wonderful pat answers people deliver, it's a wonder anyone with any kind of situation like that ever shows their face in public again. Don't tell me it was meant to be. Don't tell me God wanted that baby more than I did. Don't say things that make you feel better. Say nothing or validate the pain. "This must be hard. I'm so sad this happened to you." And if the person suffering from the injustice tries to offer you solace by saying it must not have been the right timing or something ridiculous like that, intervene and say, "No, this is a terrible thing that has happened." When we are validated, we can let go. If we have to defend ourselves, it actually makes things worse. This is true for kids too. Validate their feelings and frustrations. Validation is a wonderful tool for you to believe you are enough. You can't fix it, but you can validate, and that is the truest gift. You are enough, you have enough, and you do enough. That is what the adventure is all about. Find ways to let go of your own expectations of what enough looks like. It looks like you, and you are enough. Just wondering, how can you find peace with being enough? What expectations can you let go of to be okay with what you do offer? In what ways are you enough? List 10. What are ways you have been helpful and still maintain your dignity? How is your give-receive balance? Are you giving too much? Not enough? Too often? What do boundaries around giving look like for you? You may need permission not to give too much of your time, money, and resources. What are some of the ways you feel misunderstood? When have you felt validated? I wonder if there's someone you know who is really struggling and could benefit from some validation. Who? How will you validate them? Never underestimate the power of validation.